So the next kind of method that we're going to take a look at for our classes is going to be the equals method. So the equals operator cannot be used to compare the contents of two objects, since the reference variables only contain a reference to an object rather than the object itself. The equals operator would only make comparisons with those references. So essentially it would only be checking to see if the two variables reference the same object. So to determine if two objects are equal, meaning that the contents of those two objects are equivalent to each other, the fields of the objects must be the same. So objects of, let's say the stock class, for example, will have a symbol field, which is a string, and a share price, which is going to be a double. So two stock objects are equal if both of those fields are equal. So using this particular class as an example, we have this equals method. It's going to return either true or false. So we're going to say public boolean. Since we want to return a true or false value, we want to return a boolean. We then pass into this method a stock object. So when we call this method, we're going to call it on an object, and we're going to pass in another object. So that way we can go ahead and have our two objects that we want to compare together. So in this case, we're going to differentiate between those two objects by using this to indicate the object that we are currently calling this method on. And then we're going to use other object, so the name that we gave this parameter here, to indicate the other object that we are passing into this method. So we're going to say this.symbol.equals, meaning that we're going to take the string, that symbol field of our current object, and we're going to compare that using the equals method of the string class to the symbol field of the other object. So we're going to compare those two things together. And we're also going to check that the share price, so we've got this.share price of our current object, that is equal to, and because this is just a double, a primitive data type, we can use the equals operator here at least. So we'll use that operator to compare that to and make sure that it's equal to the share price of the other object. So we can go ahead and do something similar with our rectangle class. In this particular case, because both the length and width are doubles, it'll look a little bit simpler than what we have right here. But let's go take a look in that rectangle demo and put that together. So inside of rectangle demo, we've got a couple of different objects. We've got things like rect, box, room, and square. And we kind of want to be able to compare these to each other to see if maybe the contents of two of these things are equivalent. So we need to go ahead and implement that equals method. So we'll come over to our rectangle class, come down to the bottom of this. And just after our toString method, we'll go ahead and add on to this with the equals method. So we're going to say public boolean equals. And the thing that we need to pass into this equals method is going to be some object of the rectangle class, because that's how we're going to do our comparisons. So I'll call it something like other rect. So we'll go ahead and use a name like that to differentiate between our current object that we're calling the equals method on and this other rect that we're passing into the equals method. And then right here, we'll go ahead and create the body of this. So because we specified that the return type should be a boolean, we need to go ahead and make sure that we're returning something that evaluates to either true or false. So we're going to go ahead and return the whole set of individual boolean expressions where we're comparing the different fields for these two objects. So we need to compare the length field and the width field. So we're going to return this.length. So this is how we're going to go get the length of the current object. That is equal to other rect.length. So we're going to compare their lengths. And we also want to go ahead and compare their widths. So we'll do the same thing there. We'll say this.width is equal to other rect.width. Okay. So this whole statement right here is just going to go ahead and compare those two fields. We're using the logical AND because we want to combine them together, essentially saying that if the length and the width are both equivalent, then that tells us that the two objects are equal, and we can go ahead and return true. Otherwise, if either one of those is false, the entire thing is false, so we would return false. So then what we can go ahead and do is come back over here. Let's go ahead and do one of these comparisons. Let's say after these print statements, using the toString method, just underneath that, we'll go ahead and include a little if statement right here. So we'll basically just check to see if the two objects are equal. So let's say we take first rect and box. So we've got rect dot equals, So rect is the object that we are calling this method on. So when we come over to our equals method, essentially that's going to be what corresponds to this.length and this.width. Essentially you can replace that with rect.length and rect.width if you want to try to imagine precisely what this method is going to be doing. And then the thing we're going to pass in is going to be box. So box is going to be the rectangle object that we passed in, meaning that that's going to correspond to other rect.length and other rect.width, because that's the thing that we passed in right here. So once we do all of that, we can then go ahead and maybe print something to the console if this ends up being true. So we could say something like the rectangles are equal. Otherwise, if that gives us false, then we can just do the opposite, which go ahead and say that the rectangles are not equal. So we'll say else the rectangles are not equal. Go ahead and save that. And so if we go ahead and run this right now, because of the fact that rect and box have completely different dimensions, you know, rect is going to have 1, 1, box is 15, 5, then obviously this is going to print out that the rectangles are not equal. So if we go ahead and run this, we can see our very last print statement right here. The rectangles are not equal. So if we wanted to, we could go ahead and modify this. So let's say that when I'm setting up my rect, I'm still using that getRectangle method, but maybe I give it the values 15 and 5. So that way then it matches up with box. So now whenever I do this comparison, it's going to say that they are equal because their dimensions are the same. So now we see the rectangles are equal. And to kind of describe a little bit about what's going on again, essentially we're going to do rect that equals box. So rect has a length of 15 and a width of 5. Box also has a length of 15 and a width of 5. So when we come over here to do this comparison, so we're doing this.length, so that's getting rect's length, which is 15. We're doing other rect.length, that's going to get box's length, so that's also 15. We compare those, see that they're equal to each other. We'll then go ahead and do the other check. We say this.width, so rect's width is 5, and then other rect.width, it's going to be for box's width, which is also 5. We'll see that those two things are equal to each other, so that's also true. So then we have true and true. That evaluates to true, and that's what we're going to go ahead and return from this equals method. And so then the end result, when we come back over to rectangle demo for this check that we have right here, so this little part right here, this is going to evaluate to true because they have the same dimensions. And so this print statement right here on line 18, that's what's going to print to the console saying that the rectangles are equal. Okay, so at this point, this will kind of conclude everything for the equals method. Once you understand the general logic for it, it's pretty straightforward. You're essentially just going through each one of the different fields of your class. So in this case, we just had a length and width, specifically the non-static fields. Keep in mind that something like instance count is not going to be used because that's part of the class, not part of the objects. So you're primarily looking at the non-static fields like length and width and just comparing each one of those things to see if all of that data inside of those objects is equivalent. So in the next video, what we're going to take a look at now is kind of the inverse of this, I'll say, where now we're going to take a look at how to actually take the content in one of these objects and copy that into another object. So we'll have quite a bit to say about how to approach this and what it means to actually copy the content from one object into another. This will eventually allow us to lead into the next kind of big topic, which is going to be aggregation. We'll see how that applies to that as well. So we'll take a look at all of that in the next video.